Okay, so we're moving forward at a good pace, and we've completed about a third of the alphabet. And as usual, we'll do a quick recap of the Aleph to the Zayin, first 7 letters, before jumping on to the 8th letter, the letter Chet. So what we said is that the AlephBet Gimel together are the ultimate givers. The Aleph is the ultimate giver, representing Hashem, representing God. The Bet providing some sort of housing, some sort of basis that he can exist, that godliness can exist in this world. And these two opposites reach their balance with the Gimel, and this balance allows the ultimate giving by beings on this world, or a world that is capable of giving goodness to the beyond to the creations. The Dalit is the ultimate receiver, because a giver without a receiver is an incomplete world. And so the downtrodden, the Dalit who has nothing, is Dal, is waiting to receive something. And when he receives, the Dalit turns into a Hay. Okay, the Hay's got the shape of the Dalit with the Yud. The Yud is also just like Aleph's godliness, so is the Yud godliness, and the Dalit becomes a Hay. And the Hay is the Hevel, the breath in our voices, which is the life in this world, the godliness in this world. It's like the word for nisham, for breath, nishima, in Hebrew, is the same word as neshama, which is the soul. Once we have this complete system in place, then we can extend it further. And then we have the vav, which is like a pipe, and the vav is and, because it always connects things further, just like a pipe keeps connecting things. And finally, last 2 weeks ago, we learned about the zayin, which is like a vav with a yud, or with a source of on top. In other words, we have this pipe, and everything that we learned before, the Aleph to the Hay, gets compressed into this little dot on top of the zayin, and that is what the zayin is. And that's why the zayin is 7. The little dot on top is like the 7th day of the week, the Shabbat, which feeds the vav, which is the 6 days of the week. Or the little dot is the point in the middle of a cube, representing the spatial side of this world. And the dot in the middle is the godliness that brings it together. That's the little dot on top of the zayin. Okay, so now that we've recapped, we'll move ahead to the letter Chet. And you'll see I've written Chet here 2 different ways, because there is a difference depending on your custom. If you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi, how the Chet is written in the Torah. And there are a few differences between some of the letters. Most of what we talk about will probably be according to the Ashkenazi custom, which is slightly more complicated. In fact, most of the, if you have a difference between an Ashkenazi Torah or mezuzah or tefillin and a Sephardi one, they're a little bit more, they have more dots and dashes, which normally makes them a little bit more expensive because they're a little bit harder to write. But both of them have their sources in proper holy sources, and we'll learn from both of them. When we get to the shape, we'll see what we can learn from each of the shapes. So the name of the letter is Chet. Now, I think if I have to ask you what does Chet sound like, we'll jump straight to the second meaning over here. It's Chet that's written completely differently, right? The letter Chet you normally write like this, Chet Yud Taf, okay? And the Chet, which is a sin, which sounds exactly the same, is also got the Chet, but it's got a Tet instead of a Taf. And it's got an Aleph at the end that we don't pronounce. Yeah, I think the idea over there is that when a person sins, he sort of doesn't notice the godliness in this world. That's why the Chet is, Hashem is always there. No matter what you do, Hashem is there. But when a person chooses not to see him, then he can come to do sin. So even though the word is not written like sin, it sounds like sin, and that is one of the meanings. And the other meaning, coming to the beginning, is two words, chitat or mechita. Okay, both similar, but with slightly different meanings. Chitat means the fear. In this week's parasha, where it talks about Yaakov, he came back to Israel with all his sons. And then there's the incident where Dinah, his daughter, was raped. And the brothers did this trick, and they killed all the men of the tribe that raped her. The Yaakov was very, very concerned that there would be some retribution, that the other tribes would come and fight against them. And the Torah says nothing happened because chitat Elokim alehem, the fear of God was on the whole land, and they kept the distance. So chitat means some sort of fear. Mechita is when you grind different things together into one mush, limchot. So sort of taking opposite forces and grinding them into one mixture. What is the number 8? Okay, moving on to our list of 5. The number 8 is beyond nature. Okay, this is quite fascinating. Because we said that 6 is nature, because 6 is the 6 days of the week, the 6 sides of an object that we mentioned earlier. By the way, in a person's body, there's also 6 main limbs, right? The right hand, the left hand, the right leg, the left legs, the top torso and the bottom torso. But the 7th is the neshama, which is godliness, but it's godliness encased inside the 6 that brings the 6 together. So the 7 is godliness inside the world. But when we go to 8, we're going one step above that. We're going beyond nature. So what day of the week, what day do we bris a child, do we give him to circumcise a child? On the 8th day. Because the 8th day, because the bris is taking something and saying nature is not good enough for us. We're going to make nature, we're going to go even beyond nature. And in fact, there's an amazing story in the Gemara of one of the non-Jewish leaders that comes up to Rabbi Akiva, and he says to him, whose deeds are greater, man's deeds or God's deeds? Obvious question, you should say God's deeds, and the rabbi answers him, man's deeds. And he got such a shock. He says, well, why do you bris yourselves, right? Why do you give yourself a circumcision? It's circumcision. If man is born perfect, why do you change nature? And he answered him, I knew you were going to ask the question. That's why I said man's deeds. Now, the idea here is that Hashem gives us the ability to, every now and then, touch beyond nature. So 8 is beyond nature, and we'll see a few more examples towards the end of the shiur. Very interesting. You mentioned, you asked earlier, Brian, about other languages, and I'll include other cultures. I happened to be in China in 2008, one day before the beginning of the Olympics over there. And the Olympics, the 2008 Olympics, were on the 8th of the 8th, 2008. And that wasn't coincidental. They chose that date because the Chinese believe that 8 is a very spiritual number. Now, we believe that the Eastern cultures, right, they say that the Western cultures, Western religions are relatively modern religions, right? They all go back to Judaism. Clearly, Christianity is based in Judaism, right? Jesus was a Jew, and the Old Testament is based on what they call the New Testament. The New Testament is what they call the Old Testament, which we call the Bible. Islam is definitely based on Judaism. Muhammad was a friend of the Jews, and he wanted them to follow him, and when they didn't, he created a version of of the Bible that he called the Quran, which is very similar to the Bible. Apparently, I'm not an expert on the Quran, with some interesting changes. For example, Abraham, instead of putting Isaac on the altar, he puts Ishmael on the altar. But nevertheless, it's a clear derivation of Judaism. But then people challenge and they say, what about Buddha? What about the Chinese and Indian religions? They seem to go back, 1,000, 3,000 years. Where do they come from? So I didn't bring the verses over here. I'm not going to dig them out now. But in about 3 weeks ago, we read in the Torah that after Sarah, Abraham's wife, passes away, Yitzchak, his son, brings him another woman to be with. Her name's Keturah. And there's an opinion that she's the same concubine, Hagar, who was Ishmael's mother. It doesn't matter whether she's the same woman or other woman. But nevertheless, Abraham has a whole lot of children. Yes, I think about 8 children from her. So he has a total of 9 children, Ishmael and these, plus one child, which is Isaac, which is going to be the continuation of the Jewish people, which we believe is the heart of the world and has the job of correcting everything. And then the Torah says something amazing. It says Abraham gave everything he had to Yitzchak. And to the children of the concubines, he gave presents. So immediately the rabbi says, if he gave everything to Yitzchak, what presents were left to give to the others? Everything is everything, right? And they accept it. He gave them the Shem Tum'ah, the name of impurity. What does that mean? So I saw a fascinating explanation based on the Midrash, based on the Torah and ancient Midrash. I saw in a commentary of an English commentary years ago by his name now, the rabbi that translated the Sefer Yetzirah. And he says that what happened, Avraham Avinu never received the Torah. Right? The Midrash says that Avraham Avinu looked around, he saw idol worship, and he said, it doesn't make sense. You can't build an idol and then say the idol created you. So he looked, he said, who created all this fascinating nature, the reality that we have in the world? And he looked at the sun, and then he saw the sun set in the nighttime. So he looked at the moon. The moon disappeared in the daytime. And then he came to the conclusion that there must be a force that's beyond the sun, beyond the moon, a spiritual force, and he called that God. And that was the beginning of his belief in God. So what this everything says to us, that everything that Avram did was almost through trial and error. Avram was the ultimate philosopher who reached belief, as opposed to Moshe, who received the Torah in tradition. He received it through opening his eyes and thinking carefully. And he had all these amazing philosophies, which he improved and fine-tuned over the years. And the previous philosophies, which were still quite fascinating, these are the Shem Tumah. These are the ideas that he gave to the other children. And then what does the Torah say? Vayishlach otam kedma el eretz kedem. He sent them eastwards to the lands of the east. And if you look at the timing, right, Avraham Avinu lived approximately 3,700 years ago, which I don't think there's accurate calculations, but that's approximately the ages of these ancient Eastern religions. So it's not surprising then, if we see this, that in some of these religions, we'll find some commonality to what we believe. When I was working in China many years ago, I was fascinated to learn that in China and in Korea, they have something in common with us with our calendar. You know, there's 2 kinds of calendars in the world based on nature. The one is a lunar calendar. It takes the moon exactly 29 and a half, almost about 29 and a half days to circle the Earth. So if we wait for the moon to disappear and appear again exactly 1 month later, you get a month of 29 and a half days. And therefore the Muslims created a calendar based on the moon, which alternates between 29 and 30 days, because you can't have 29 and a half days. And that's why if you multiply 29 and a half by 12, you get 354, which is less than 365. That's why the Muslim year is a little bit shorter. It's 11 days shorter than the solar year. And that's why their festivals keep shifting by 11 days. And Ramadan could appear in any day of the English calendar. So that's one way. And they say, well, if we want to create a year, let's just take randomly 12 months, but there's no meaning, there's no significance, natural significance of the year. It's just the number 12 of the months which is related to the moon. Then you have the solar year, which the amount that it takes, the time that it takes the Earth to rotate around the sun is 365 and a quarter days approximately. And there's no significance of a month. So if we want 12 months, let's divide 365 by 12, and you get approximately 30 and a half. And that's why the English months have either 30 or 31 days. With the exception of February, which is a completely different story. In parentheses, there used to only be 10 months in the solar year. July and August did not exist. Okay, which by the way explains why September, which sounds like 7th, is actually the 9th month. And October, which is octal, which should be 8, is the 10th month. And November, which sounds like 9, is the 11th month. And December, which is decimal, should be 10 and is the 12th month, because July and August came in the middle. July was introduced by Julius Caesar. That's why it's called July. And of course, he had to have the maximum month. He had to have 21 days. And when Augustus came afterwards, he also couldn't be outdone. He also had to have 31 days. So you had 2 months of 31. So we had to find these days somewhere else, and they stole the days from poor February. All this is not really important. All it says is that in the Western world, you have calendars based on the moon, calendars based on the sun. The Jewish calendar is based on both. Okay, every month we count according to the moon, similar to the Muslims. But every 2-3 years we have a leap year and add a month to make sure that Pesach doesn't land up in all different times of the seasons. And who does the same thing? The Chinese and the Koreans. So if you want to believe this direction, this explanation of the Bible, that Abraham took some of his beliefs and sent it to China and to India and to Korea, well, Korea was part of China at the time, would explain that. Nevertheless, this whole diversion I just told you was just to explain that 8 in some other cultures also has a supernatural meaning. So coming back to our list, we have the name, we have the number of 8, the shape of the Chet. So let's look at the Ashkenazi one first. If you look carefully, there's actually 2 letters here. What are they? Joined by this little bridge in the middle. Can you see 2 zayins? Okay. If you look at the letter zayin, I'm even just going to write a zayin here. This is the zayin, and this is the zayin. It's just a bit bigger. So the Chet is actually 2 zayins joined together by a bridge. Okay. And remember, when we spoke about zayin, one of the things we said is a clay zayin is a weapon. Sometimes we have to use force to achieve our ideals, right? We said, as I said earlier, zayin is the little dot on top with the pipe. It also looks like the shape of the sword. So somehow the Chet is 2 swords brought together by some sort of common denominator. If we look at the other Chet, the Chet that we more used to in the modern Hebrew that we write, and that appears in the Sephardi Sifrei Torah, we see a letter that's very similar to the Hey, but It's closed up the gap. And what we're going to say, we'll explain in a minute, that I think these two versions of the Chet correspond to the two explanations of the name that we gave earlier. But before we do that, let's look quickly at the first letter in the Torah. That's the first word in the Torah that starts with the letter Chet. And that's still in the first chapter of Beraishit. Vayorem Elokim, God said, Yishutzu hamayim sheretz nefesh chaya, v'of yofef al haaretz al pnei raki hashamayim. Okay, chaya is the word animal, right? Build the chayas. And that's what the Chet teaches us about. So how do we bring this all together? What is this message for the Chet? The idea of the Chet is, we remember that before the world was created, everything was tohu vabohu. In other words, if we're talking about supernatural, if we're talking about the letter 8, where we go beyond this world, beyond the limitation of the world, there's no order. What is tohu vabohu? It's not just a balagan. It means that the beauty, there's such a combination, such a correspondence where everything fits in so perfectly that to our simple eyes, it looks like a balagan. I don't know if I've used this example before. I'm actually glad that you can only see my face and not see the table that I'm working on, because it's a bit of a balagan. And one of the reasons it's a balagan is because I've got papers here from my mediation, and I've got papers here from my shiurim, and I've got my personal papers over here, and I've got bank papers over there. And while I'm working, I don't sort things out. Every now and then, my wife, who, as you know, is a ganenet, is a nursery school teacher, and she likes things being in order. So she's got this device called a basket. And this basket says, let's put everything in its own basket. Or, yeah, I didn't plan this, but can you see this? She's busy doing something where she has all different color beads, and she'll go to the shop and buy little containers that'll allow each bead to be in its own individual box. Why does she do that? Because that allows her to have some control, puts things in order. And she'll do the same for me. She'll either file or put baskets, one file for bank papers, one file for tax papers, one file for Torah papers. But what happens if I've got a paper from the bank about my taxes? Where do I put it? It's got to be in two places. In other words, when you separate it with our limited thinking, it helps us think in an orderly fashion, but it also limits us. And that's what God did when he created. When God created the world, everything was tohu vabohu. That's one of the first words in the Torah. And then it says, Vayavdel Elohim ben ha'or v'choshech. Hashem separates between the light and the dark. He bought one of these little baskets. Thank you, Nechama, for helping me with this shiur. And he made a basket of light and a basket of dark. And then he went and he said, well, let's buy a basket of heavens and a basket of the earth. And then he bought another basket, and let's buy a basket of the sea and the earth. Everything was havdalot, was separations, was putting things in these little baskets. And by doing that, we have the structure. He made man and woman, he separated them into two separate man and woman. But if we want to we can't understand him, but if we want to get a feeling of what is God, what is godliness, right? It's the balagan. In other words, when we started in this world, when we started as a Dalit with nothing, and slowly we started taking in the AlephBet Gimel, receiving and turning ourselves into hay, we still kept our things limited and in a structured way. Every now and then, we remember that there's something beyond us. There's something that's way beyond us, and when we look at that, it appears to be a balagan. And that's when sometimes we're required to do things that are contradictory to our natural thinking, okay? And that's what the number 8 is. Now, we can never stay in number 8. we can experience number 8 when we're 8 days old, the bris for a few seconds, and go through this extremely difficult, extremely happy, but extremely difficult process of circumcising a child, right? And there's some movements today to cancel circumcision or to give the child an anesthetic, which is better not to do, because it's difficult. Because in our world we don't understand why we do this to a young child. But the number 8 is every now and then we can get an inkling, almost like lightning, right? What is so amazing about lightning? That the force of lightning is so powerful, right? We don't have generators that can generate the power of lightning, but it can exist in the world for a fraction of a second, just to tell us that, you know what, there is lightning out there. Just because you don't have it, it doesn't mean it's not there. And that's what the Chet is. There's ultimate godliness over there, that every now and then you'll get a spark of it, but you stay where you are. And that is the number Chet. And that is why it's mחיתה, it's squashing all the forces together, so to speak. And I say, so to speak, coming back to Tohu Vavohu, because we can never get to the original Tohu Vavohu, because we just cannot be there. It's beyond us. We have to be modest about it, otherwise we won't exist. And that creates the fear. And what fear is it's talking about? Fear of God. In other words, we realize that whatever we do, there's an awe, right? And you can look at it at 2 different levels. You can look at the lower level, that there's fear, that we're scared of God. God forbid we'll do a sin and Hashem will punish us with the same lightning that we spoke about. But the higher level of fear is not fear of that he'll punish us. It's just awe, knowing that there's such greatness over there that it's worth me doing the right thing, because the source of this greatness told me what to do. And therefore, in my modesty, I know it's the right thing to do, even though sometimes I don't understand it. Even though I'll learn even all the letters from Aleph to Taf, and at the end I'll still have some questions. So that is the letter 8. And the shape. Let's talk about the two different shapes. So the one shape is the 2 Zions, right? The 2 Zions are 2 types of weapons. Weapons normally come to destroy, but we said when we spoke about Zion the last time, that we can use weapons actually for goodness, right? I think I told the story when I went to Atlas Aircraft, and they interviewed me, and they said, as a religious person, how can you create weapons for the South African Air Force that will maybe be used to destroy, to hurt people? And I said, the same weapons, if they're used in the right way, can defend a country, right? And maybe a good example is the Cold War, right? All Cold Wars, but the ultimate Cold War that we think about that went on for years between Russia and America. The fact that both of them had these terrible, terrible weapons created a situation where nobody needed weapons, right? Now, there were wars fought between their countries affiliated to them, but thank God there was no Third World War between these 2 great powers. And that is these 2 Zions, right? These 2 forces that somehow bridge together, right? The little bridge together that says that I take the great forces together, and this is something we don't understand. We don't understand how negative forces can bring us to the positive. We don't really understand it. We get an inkling by the examples that I'm giving. But what that really says is that these opposite forces are actually telling us, giving us a hint of the godliness, of the tohu vavohu, of the big balagan, of the mixture that existed before, where opposites came together. And normally opposites came together, you get an explosion. But here opposites coexist in the spiritual world, in the ultimate spiritual world, that we don't understand. And if we bring it to the difference between the Chet and the Hey, in this world, okay, if you try and be God in this world, it's not going to work. You're going to sin, okay? And you're going to turn the Hey, which is the ultimate symbol of Hashem in this world, and we said that the little hole on the top of the Hey is the hole of tshuva, where you can always go upwards. You block, God forbid, you block the hole, and there's no place for tshuva. In other words, with all respect to godliness and ultimate godliness, we live in this world and we're limited, and therefore we're happy where we are. We can learn that there's a concept of the Chet. We'll never ever understand the Chet. And this is the nefesh chaya that talks about, this is the ultimate life that actually drives the whole world. In other words, this pasuk, this verse talks about the creation of the animals, but we know that the difference between animals and inanimate objects are this nefesh, this liveliness, which comes from the ultimate eight, the ultimate super spiritual. Take a deep breath, and I'm going to move. Questions on this before we move on to the next two slides, which will give us a little bit more understanding of it. A few more examples. Okay, I don't know anything to learn about the sound. That's why I've shaded the sound out. Okay, so we always bring the story from the Talmud about the children who gave drashot on the different letters, and on the letter Chet, the same children said that if you do all that Hashem does, Hashem will, this is the wrong translation, he will give you chaim. Okay, I'll translate it, I'll correct it on the fly. Will give you favor. Okay, what is the word chaim, right? We know that the word chaim is something, it's hard to explain it, but for those of us who grew up in hearing Yiddish, not talking Yiddish, but at least hearing it, we know that chaim is some beauty that you don't understand. It's not pretty. Somebody can be ugly and have a lot of chaim. In other words, chaim is the beauty in a person that you cannot see, but it's there. You know that it's there. And the letters chaim in the Kabbalah normally come to signify, or Shetevot stand for the word chokhmat hanistar. The chokhmah, the wisdom of the Kabbalah, of the hidden Torah, chokhmat hanistar. And these children said, he'll give you favor, but if we're looking at it in a much deeper level than maybe these children understood, they were talking about this chaim, this super spiritual level that we can only know exists, but not really meet. Okay. Kol machloket shehi l'shem shamayim. This is a quote from Pekei Avot. Any machloket, any argument, disagreement, which is based on a heavenly purpose, will exist forever. And the machloket that is not, will not last forever. An example of the machloket between Hillel and Shammai, or that is l'shem shamayim, that is for heavenly purpose, are the disagreements, the arguments in the Gemara. Now, you know, sometimes you learn Gemara and you say, wow, these guys are always fighting. In fact, I'll tell you a story. We have a shiur here in the Shabbos afternoon, 45-minute shiur, and there's two different rabbis, they alternate between them on different topics. And the people who come to the shiur, most of them are Talmidei Chachamim, they're pretty learned people. And often we touch on complicated issues and we have it out. And a week and a half ago, after the shiur, which was quite a lively shiur, the Chama said to me, did you enjoy the shiur? I said, yeah, this was quite an amazing shiur. So you were just fighting with each other. I said, we weren't fighting. We were clarifying. We were coming to an understanding of a point of Torah, and that based on understanding what the other person said and what I think, and we both think we're right, that the truth is some combination of the two of us together. Almost like these two zayins, right? These two swords that are coming together. When you want to sharpen a knife, what do? Right? You take the one knife and you take the other knife and you scrape them one against the other. The Gemara compares two Talmidei Chachamim that are learning like two knives that sharpen each other, right? Now, it doesn't just mean that they sharpen it, that they get, that they develop their intelligence against each other. Maybe that's true also. But the real meaning is that by the aim of the argument is not to push downright the other person or insult the other person to show that you're better than the other person. It's to try and understand the truth. And if you've got an understanding and he's saying something else or she's saying something else and you don't understand it, you have to get to the bottom of it. And these are the arguments of the Gemara. So we say every day at the end of our davening, Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam. Talmidei Chachamim, great scholars of the Torah, they increase peace in the world. I remember years ago somebody saying to me, this is a truth that whoever wrote that had a sense of humor. Look how the rabbis are fighting with each other. But the truth is, based on what I said, that's the explanation. When you have an argument, and the argument is to try and understand something in the world better, and it doesn't really matter if you win or lose. Nobody's going to win or lose. But at the end of the day, your conclusion is a combination of two opposite opinions. You now have a more complete opinion. You have more shlemut, more perfection. And that is the word shalom, right? That's why in Hebrew, we say shalom when you say hello, and you say shalom when you say goodbye. Not because the Israelis don't know when they're coming or going. It's because shalom is a combination of the opposites. Shalom is completeness. The word peace is bringing the opposites together. And that is hinted in these two zayins, these two weapons, right? Because argument is a weapon. Argument is normally not a positive thing. But if the argument is shilosh l'shem shemayim, if it's just to show how clever you are or insult your friend, that's not agreement that will last. That's not something that will further the purpose of the world. And finally, we'll come back to the letter 8. I mentioned the Brit Milah, which is we take nature and we add to nature. Okay, by the way, this is even hinted to in the Torah. You could say, who says you can give a Brit Milah? Well, Hashem says so in the Torah. But in addition, we say every week in the Kiddush, we read the words from Bereshit. Hashem finished creating the world. Elohim, and he combined everything he did into one. And then right at the end, it says, Asher bara Elokim la'asot. We're talking about the whole world that God created. Should have stopped there. Asher bara Elokim. Stop. Full stop. But we don't say that. The Torah adds another word. Asher bara Elokim la'asot. In other words, Hashem created nature, but he created nature with us, giving us not only the ability, but the permission, not even the mitzvah, to sometimes go beyond and lift up nature. And that is what the Brit Milah is on the 8th day. Simchat Torah, when we celebrate the Torah, we believe, was written even before the world was created. The Torah was the blueprint that the world was created according to. So when we Simchat Torah, when we dance with the Torah, we do it on the 8th day of Sukkot. And Shavuot is the day we receive the Torah. We celebrate it after counting the 7 weeks of Sfirat HaOmer. And then the beginning of the 8th week, the 50th day, is Shavuot, because that's when we celebrate, we commemorate our connection with the supernatural. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who's in the temple. The temple is the one point on earth where while it's on earth, it's connected to supernatural. The pasuk, the verse in Tehillim says, Yerushalayim habnuya ki ish yechu b'la yachdav. Jerusalem that's built up is the land that's connected. And the Gemara says, where's this connected to? It's connected to the Jerusalem in heaven. In other words, everything in the temple is hinted at, it hints at something that's beyond our nature. And the high priest wears 8 pieces of clothing, and he cannot wear 7, he cannot wear 9. very specific clothing. In fact, they're divided into 4 and 4, which reminds us a little bit of Dalit. Dalit is this world, but you take these 2 forces together, you create the supernatural. Okay. If you look at I should probably put a picture here, but if you look at the Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark, or the table, or each of the 2 altars, there's 4 different vessels that were inside both the tabernacle and afterwards they were inside the temple. Each of these had 2 poles to carry them. Again, we have 8 poles coming out of the 4 vessels. 8, again, connecting us with the supernatural. Again, staying in the temple, because that's where the supernatural things are. When the Kohanim were doing what they had to do, sacrifices and the other worship, the Leviim, the Levites, had to sing and play musical instruments, and there were 7 musical instruments combined with their voices, which is the number 8. And finally, an animal. For an animal sacrifice, an animal is only kosher to be used as a sacrifice. You're allowed to eat it for regular purposes when it's younger, but you can only bring it for a sacrifice. You can only make it supernatural on the 8th day. So just a series of examples where we see that 8 in our tradition is always linked with the supernatural. So I'm going to quickly recap and of the main ideas we learned today. Chet symbolizes the supernatural. And because it's supernatural, we don't understand it completely. And we see things that maybe initially say doesn't make sense. But what we discussed today gives us a bit of a feeling. And if you take the supernatural and you take it where it shouldn't be, or you try to bring it too much into your life, you will get to chas v'chalila a chet, get to the sin. You will hide the aleph, and you'll get to the sin. But we got to realize all the time that everything we do here is just a small part of something that's beyond us. And this is 8. This is the supernatural number with all those examples that we just saw. Okay? And here we get the opposite forces coming together, the opposite klei zayin, and together they create perfection. But we've got to be very careful, because this can, God forbid, cause the hay to become a chet. And this is the chaya, this is the chayut, this is the ultimate life that we have in this world. That's what I've got to say for today on the chet. I spoke a lot. Any questions that before we conclude the recording? So thank you all for listening. And a sentence that I always in the call, I'll always say that I think this is fascinating. And every time we don't learn not just about the letters, but how they link from one to the other. But the idea is not to be fascinated, not to be impressed. The idea is to think, well, now I've got a bit of an understanding of how Hashem runs the world. How do I take this and how do I make myself a better person in this world? Okay, how do I find the aleph in my life? How do I make sure that I'm not taking it out of control and giving it a housing of bet? How do I keep the balance between the two of the aleph, bet, gimel? How do I make sure that I'm giving, or sometimes I've got to be the dalit? How do I have the ability? I make sure I got to the point of receiving. All of us should receive sometime. Even if we're wealthy, we can receive chesed from other people. Okay? And together we create the hay. How do I use this in order to create a pipe to ensure that the godliness, the goodness keeps on coming to this world? And each of us, each of me, well, I'll do my little bit to try create my pipe, to try make myself in this world a slightly better place. Remembering all the time that like the zayin, it all comes from a godly source. And remember beyond that there is a world beyond that I understand that actually keeps us all together. Thank you very much.